You've built a successful life, but now what? Welcome to the Gen X Collective podcast. We're for men who are navigating midlife with purpose, health, wealth, family, work, and the mark you've made on the world. We're talking about the stuff that really matters with experts who have solutions, advice, and a sense of humor. And now, here's our host, Laurent Truc.
Welcome back to the Gen X Collective podcast. I am your host, Laurent Truc. Today's episode is about career reinvention and understanding one of the most misunderstood industries in North America, the oil and energy sector. Chris Moore joins us to talk about how a dentist ends up in the oil sector, why he sees energy as one of the strongest wealth-building opportunities ahead, and how his curiosity led him to take a major shareholder position and eventually join the board of Prospera Energy. If you're a Gen X man thinking about a second half reinvention or career expansion, or just smart investing in general, Chris's story will hit the mark. Chris, welcome to the show.
All right, Lauren. Nice to see you. Thanks for having me on the show.
Appreciate you making the time.
No problem.
So I've been looking forward to this. You and I met not too long ago and hit it off very, very quickly because you have such an incredible background. Thought it would be fun to just have a chat and record it and see what happens.
Yeah, sounds good.
Would love for you to just give us an introduction. Who's Chris Moore?
Yeah, Dr. Chris Moore. I am an independent board member for the company Prospera Energy, a junior heavy oil producer with prolific fields out in Saskatchewan and Alberta. Dentist by profession. For 34 years, I run a private practice in Peterborough, Ontario. And entomologist by training in university, having studied digestive biochemistry of caterpillars.
Wow.
So you can't get much more diverse than that.
Very cool.
Married 31 years to a beautiful wife. I've got 3 adult children who are now out of university and out of the house, off the payroll sort of thing. Even got them off my cell phone plan. So big time stuff. Passions are badminton, fly fishing, and investing. I'm up every morning at 4 a.m. At that point, I work out, do some meditation, and do my investing research. So I'm really excited about the future, especially given where Prospera is right now.
Very cool. So before Prospera, help me understand, like you said, completely opposite ends of the spectrum. How do you go from being a dentist with his own practice to joining oil and having any love for oil for that matter?
Yeah, it's a bizarre combination, isn't it? I get asked that a lot, really. And my response is always the same. I grew up in Cold Lake, Alberta. As a kid, my pastimes were camping, hunting, and fishing. And, there were pump jacks everywhere. So, as a kid, I didn't really understand the boom-bust cycles of oil, of course. But I do know that when we moved up there shortly after the oil embargo of 73, it was really easy to make the hockey team in the area. There weren't very many people in the area. Fast forward a couple years, the amount of expansion as oil money came into the area was phenomenal. All of a sudden, from a child standpoint, I had a lot more people at school, harder to make the hockey team. But unfortunately, we were also there for the bust of the 1980s. So I saw jobs being lost and people leaving the area as such. So, you fast forward to COVID, and because it was always on my radar, I knew enough about the industry that I knew that it's not an industry that you can just turn off on a dime and expect it to start up as it was in 9 months. Mm-hmm. So I basically took it upon myself to learn as much as I could about the industry, supply demand cycles, who supplies what are the dynamics, what is shale, what is fracking, what is OPEC, what is the narrative that's going on. And basically what I did is I came out with a thesis with 10 various points, and I decided that this is something that I wanted to get involved with because I felt like it was such an out-of-favor commodity that it would be an area that we potentially could create generational wealth. So really what I was looking for was a small company that I could take a sizable portion on, or a position in. And in the end, I ended up scoping out Prospera, went out to Calgary, met with management, went and saw their facilities, was really impressed. And as such, took a major position, became a major shareholder, and just earlier this year, I was invited to be part of the board.
Very cool. Most people
Yeah.
just look for a stock. You went
Call
all
me
in.
crazy. I don't know.
I'm impressed. So
Yeah.
are you still a full-time dentist today?
I am. Yeah, I practice 4 days a week. Have 13 employees, so very active. So I always say I'm a dentist by day and oil man by night, and all other times sort of things. So it's been exciting and busy. I get to work with a fabulous group of people out there. I mean, the management and the board members that I get to work with are inspirational. They're just really, really, really neat, different grade of people. So yeah, it's been exciting for me as a layperson moving into that.
Very cool. Well, I'll tell you, the dentist thing is interesting, but I really wanted to spend some time to understand oil and your company and all that. It's not something that you get to do every day, to talk to somebody who's an executive on a board for a company like this. So let's get into oil macro if you're good with it. So big question, why should I care? Like oil, to me, there's always fuel at the pump. Why is this an important topic that we should be discussing?
Yeah, then that's a great question because, I think that the way it's been portrayed to us is that we're going to be driving on unicorn dust and angel juice soon. It's an incredibly important part of our lives. It's the single most important energy feedstock that we have globally. And, when we take a look at it, it's kind of like oxygen. You take it for granted when you have it, but when you don't have it, you're going to feel it pretty darn quickly. And, there are multiple ways that we are affected by oil, but we may not realize. I mean, on a daily basis, we see the basics, like we fill up at the pump. I mean, gasoline and petroleum products still represent 94% of transportation fuels. EVs are on the margin. They're coming up to maybe 1-2% of the global fleet of personal cars, and maybe LPG is increasing in China. But generally, it's petroleum products that are moving us forward. So, we see that at the pump. And every $10 increase in oil increases our fuel prices by 8 to 10 cents at the pump. Okay. And you think about plastics, everything's plastic, whether or not it's our phone, medicines that we take, our clothing, it's everywhere. We just don't realize that the byproducts of the distillation process is substantial, and plastics are required for the modern day supply chain. So the way we transport things, if we don't have plastics, we don't have modern day supply. And with the import-export, on-demand type of economy that we run right now, that doesn't happen without oil. And thirdly, you look at food. Petroleum-based products are required for fertilizer, pesticides. It's required for the diesel to run the combines, the trucks to move it from farm to market. It's just massive. And we're already experiencing substantial inflation in food. Yeah. But as if oil starts to spike, we start to see some major fuel concerns. So, it hits us a pocketbook standpoint. But, when we see energy spikes, whether or not it was 73, 01, 98, 2020, it always funnels down into the economy. And, Goldman Sachs came out and said that, for every $10 that oil goes up or down, it affects global GDP by 0.3%. So it's very influential in our inflation profile and therefore how much we pay when we go to the bank and everything like that. So that's the economic side of things. But then we have other things. It's a very geopolitical commodity. It's global. So we have, Canada produces heavy oil, light and medium, but our heavy oil competitors are Iran, Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Russia. So we are in a crude quality standpoint that we are competing essentially with potentially countries that could be nefarious and not friendly to us. So we have to be aware that oil, any sort of interruptions in oil flow, because oil is traded on the marginal barrel, can affect the price. It can be used as a weapon, and therefore we have to be aware that we as Canadians do actually play a pretty big role globally in stabilizing the oil flow. And then finally, we've all been told that we're all going to die because we're burning too much fuel, and carbon dioxide is going to kill us because we're going to roast to death. So, but there is an environmental component, right? The potential for pollution in the oil industry is there, and it's incumbent on every oil company to be responsible, to make sure that they're not wasting, and to do their best for the environment when they're doing that. Now, in Canada, we actually have the best environmental roadmap of anywhere in the world. And people have to ask themselves, if we're competing for the heavy oil market, do you want your specific barrel that you're going to burn as Canadians from Canada, or do you want it from Venezuela, Iran, Saudi Arabia, or Russia? And that's really what it comes down to. But from a climate standpoint, is there actual, credence to the carbon dioxide? That's debatable, but there is the aspect that we have to be prudent when it comes to environmental stewardship.
Mm-hmm. There's always these discussions around the alternative sources aren't always what they seem in terms of efficiency, like the amount of energy it takes to extract some of the minerals to make electric cars and all these things. I started watching Landman. That's my new favorite show with my wife right now.
Yeah, people blowing up.
It's crazy. And so, it makes you really think about what this environmental push actually is. And are we anywhere near ready to replace oil? I mean, when you think about how integrated and how important it is right now to everything we do. When you went through some of the points there, I didn't even think about food production and how integrated it is in all of that. So.
Yeah, our population is growing so rapidly, we need to have maximum production from the farmland that we have. And as we've created urbanization, we've lost a lot of the farmland. So the amount that we can cultivate has decreased, but the amount of population we need to feed has increased. So, without petroleum products, we don't have a food grid. And without food grid, we have social breakdown within 2 weeks, right? That's what they say. We're within 2 weeks, wow. Yeah. Yeah, when you don't feed people. But yeah, in the last 15, 20 years, the globe has spent over $5 trillion on renewable energy. And we've managed to whittle our dependency on petroleum products from 82% of our energy grid all the way down to 81%.
Really? After all this time?
After all that time. The bottom line is, oil and petroleum products create high energy density and relatively efficient costs for people to move up the economic S-curve. And that's really the part of the story that most people are missing right now, is that we have 7, soon to be 8 billion people moving up their economic S-curve in the undeveloped world.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about supply. You talked about some of the countries that are involved, and I knew Saudi Arabia, Argentina, Canada, US. And then there's consortiums, OPEC. Like, what does this look like from an economics? Like, who owns and who controls most of this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. In my mind, I break it down. It's almost 50-50. It's not as 43-57, but let's just say there's OPEC and then there's non-OPEC.
Okay.
So OPEC, it's mainly it's OPEC plus. So you've got Saudi Arabia, the Middle East, Russia, and then 10 other allies. Non-OPEC, the way I break it down in my mind is you have the U.S. and everybody else, Guyana, Brazil, Canada, Norway, Britain, or whatever. And the reason that we break out the U.S. is because of the prolific nature of their shale deposits. And for people who haven't really looked at the oil industry, you would have heard the term fracking. Mm-hmm. Everybody hates fracking. And really that's what shale is. And the way that the technique works is they drill a well, it goes down 1,000 feet, and then horizontally, they put explosives down, they fracture the shale rock, and then oil comes out of that. All right. So with that, there are benefits because the U.S. already knew that the shale deposits had oil. They were able to bring on massive amounts of oil in what we call short cycle unconventional wells. Short cycle because typically it takes 18 to 22 years now for a big company to go out, find, delineate, and then get to the FID, final investment decision, and then actually pump. With shale, they're able to do this in months. So what has happened in the last 10 to 15 years is the U.S. has been able to, in a very prolific nature, manufacture oil production at a very rapid rate. So you've had high volumes come in. And in the last 10 years, they've increased their production almost 5 million barrels a day. And had it not been for shale production in the Permian, we would have already been in an oil crisis. The Permian itself has satiated global demand for the last 10 years, whereas most other production has been pretty much flat.
Wow.
So it's really important. Now, the disadvantage of shale is that it declines between 60 to 70% per well per year.
Okay.
So what happens, whereas the average well depletion is 5 to 7%, you've got wells that need to have new wells drilled, not just to grow, but to make up for that depletion. Mm-hmm. So what ends up happening is it's kind of like a treadmill. If you have a treadmill that's slowly getting steeper and steeper, you have to run faster to stay in the same place. And there are opinions out there right now that shale is actually peaking. And if it does, the growth of it, and if it does do that, we have an interesting dynamic that's forming because, as I said, shale is what actually satiated global demand. And we've been told that demand supposedly isn't going to grow. But we can talk about that from a demand standpoint because I don't believe that at all.
Got it. Okay. And then just so I understand, so shale is on one side. What are all the other ways that oil can be extracted? Yeah.
So really shale is called tight unconventional oil because it's tight in the rock and they have to use new techniques to do it. Conventional wells are you punch a hole in the ground, whether or not it's straight down as a vertical or you go down and then you go horizontal. The oil seeps in, whether or not you have to fracture the rock around it or not, and you harvest it accordingly. Now, we have oil sands, which means that we are actually harvesting oil sand at the same time as the oil. It actually comes up as one. But there are deposits where you're literally just getting oil into the tubing and you're harvesting that up. So there are, petroleum engineering, I had no idea. I mean, these guys and gals are just geniuses. It is really... It's like an art as well as a science. So I watch the guys on our team work, and it's just like, how do you know that? How do you know that? So it's really kind of cool. So unconventional is shale. Conventional is the rest of the world. Whether or not it's deep sea, whether or not it's on land, same basic concept. You punch a hole, but think of it as you have a pop can, and when you first open it, you get an immediate rush of gas, right? It goes and out you go. So that's essentially what happens. You punch a hole in the ground, you get immediate gas. Eventually, you can start pulling on that, and you start to get the liquid, but it's a finite can. You might pull harder, but you can't pull harder. You can't draw more than that's actually in that can. So what happens is that when you get to 50% of the amount in that reservoir, you start to peak in your production. And that's really what we're starting to find now, that King Hubbard's curve, who's a scientist from the 50s who predicted U.S. peak oil. We're now seeing that globally. And we've, we have underinvested to the tune of $2 billion per day in exploration in the oil industry. So we've really kind of, we may have created a situation where we could get oil spikes, and that would be devastating to the economy.
And then just going back on what you said about us here in Canada. So in Canada, it comes up with sand. Is it more challenging for us to refine because of the sand than other countries, or anything that is not shale is kind of the same difficulty?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of complicated, but in the end, heavy oil, we get paid according to what we call the WTI differential. And the reason is that Alberta and Saskatchewan, up to about a year and a half ago, were pretty landlocked. So 93% of our exports go down to the States via pipeline or rail. If it goes via pipeline, diluent needs to be added to it. So, condensate of various sorts need to be added to dilute it so it can be moved. So we get WTI less the differential. And that differential can be anywhere between 10-ish where it is now. And when times are bad and, there's not enough oil, it can blow out to as high as 30, 40, 50. Wow. So, that costs the Canadian economy billions and billions of dollars. But we do have all types of oil in Canada. It just so happens that there are certain areas, certain formations that, you are harvesting sand in order to get that oil up and out. And then what they do is they put it through various separating units that knock out the sand, and then they refine the oil from there. It's a very complicated system, but very, 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 very intuitive and interesting.
Very cool. Tell me a little bit about demand. So I think the supply is clear. So where are we heading? Like, where is the demand coming from? Is it in growth? Are we going to run out? What are the key issues here?
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because we've been fed a narrative since COVID that we are not going to need this stuff as of, well, before it was 2025, here we are, and then it was 2030, and then just last 2 weeks ago, the International Energy Agency came and said, oh, no, not 2030, now it's 2040. So you have to ask yourself, okay, well, what is the actual issue here? And, before I answer that, I will say that if you take a look at the energy transition has been going on for a long time, but it was coined after a major meeting of the group of Rome. And basically they said, you know what, we don't have enough of this stuff. The global population is growing too much. There's a scarcity of resources everywhere. We need to transition off of oil so that we have, the ability to function when we run out of the stuff. So scarcity was the name of the game. Mm-hmm. And that was the way it was until it got hijacked. And it got hijacked in 2021 after COVID. And they said, nope. We don't need to transition because we don't have enough. We need to transition because it's going to kill us. If we don't transition, carbon dioxide is going to suck, is going to fry us. And so what that did is it created a movement. And that movement came into the financial groups. And the financial groups formed an alliance, and it was called GFANZ. It was the Global Financial Alliance for Net Zero. That group of financial institutions said, no, we're not going to invest at all in oil because we're not going to need it. And if we cut off investment to the investment bank or to the producers, they can't do anything. And therefore, we're going to somehow transition to a technology that isn't there. Mm-hmm. But that's all predicated on the fact that we're not going to need oil moving forward. So here's the thing, is that in the Western world, I would encourage everybody to go online and check out Arjun Murti from Veriton. He does a podcast called Super Spiked, and he would explain this way better than I will. So I'll just summarize it, okay? Basically, you have 1 billion of us in the Western world that are super lucky. We are super rich. We live a lifestyle that most people aspire to. We have 6, soon to be 7 billion people in the undeveloped world who want our lifestyle. Mm. So you can correlate energy use to how much affluence you have in an economy. It's called the economic S-curve. So when you start off and you're walking your vegetables to market by foot, you're not using very much energy.
Sure.
Maybe you get a bicycle, but maybe you get rich enough to buy a moped so you can put it at the back. So now you're burning a little bit more. You get more affluent, maybe you buy a truck, and then maybe you want air conditioning, and then maybe you want an SUV. So we start to go up this economic S-curve, and as we go up, we burn more energy. So you and me as Canadians, we burn 23 barrels per person per year in Canada.
Wow.
The U.S. burns 22. But in the Western world, we burn on average 16 barrels, just to keep this conversation simple. That compares to China at 3.7 barrels per person per year, India at 1.4 barrels per person per year, and Africa, which is 0.4. Wow. So basically, if you took the 7 billion people who burn on average 4 barrels per person per year, and they try to get up to our standard of living, which is 16, they have to quadruple their demand in order to get to our economic affluence. So we've got, 85% of the population who want our lifestyle, who want to come up this economic S-curve. China's just hitting that inflection point right now. India's on their way. The global south is just, getting ready to go up it. You can't tell me that we're not going to need more oil. It's a cheap, energy-dense material that is the primary economic energy feed for the world. So we have never really had such a clear outlook for demand ever in the history of the oil industry since, August 27th of 1859, when Edward Drake put that first rod into the ground to get that fluid out. I mean, we have really good visibility moving forward. Now, if the undeveloped world comes out and comes to our level of affluence, are they going to burn 240 million barrels of oil a day? No. I mean, it would drive the cost of oil so high that there would be incentive to find a different technology. But the point being is that we're not peaking at 105.3 million barrels. We're not peaking at 110. We're not peaking at 120. And we're definitely not peaking by 2040, in my opinion. So, the narrative has gotten out of control, in my opinion. So, you just have to look through it.
You mentioned Canada actually had a higher consumption than an average U.S. Is that weather related for us? Is that why, the cold?
Weather and geography, right? Yes. Because we're so spread out. We spend a lot of time traveling. If you have, somewhere like South Korea where everything is more condensed, or Japan, I mean, sure. And then they've built out their, rail systems and stuff like that too. We also have a colder environment, so we've got heating issues and, sure. and stuff like that.
So based on this demand, I mean, do we, even if they don't get all the way to the levels that we're at, when do we run out?
I don't think we ever do.
No,
I don't believe we're at peak oil, either supply or demand. I think we're at peak cheap oil, and there's a difference. Because eventually, supply and demand, supply is higher than demand, prices go down, demand's higher than supply goes up. And that feeds the amount of capital that goes into the system. If oil was to rise higher, it would incentivize companies to find new technologies. U.S. shale, it may be peaking at $60 oil, but there's lots of oil still in the ground. And, humans are innovative, and with the proper economic incentivization, no, I don't think we'll ever run out. We've got so much oil around the world, but you've got to have money to go out and find it. You've got to have the money to produce it, and it's got to be at an inflation-adjusted profit. And that's why gold has always been able to buy a good suit and a good pair of shoes, because the inflation-adjusted cost for a producer to go out and harvest it is exactly that. It's adjusted for inflation.
Got it. Talk to me a little bit about Canada. So Canada, especially lately, there's been a lot of politics around pipelines and getting our oil out and expanding beyond maybe just the U.S. as our primary customer. What does this landscape look like right now?
Yeah, the pipelines are kind of a flashpoint. Alberta wants them fast. They see that they're landlocked. They see that 93% of our exports go to the States, which gives the States substantial leverage. That we have to pay a WTI differential on much of our oil, which costs us billions of dollars. So the landlock has been decreased because the Trans Mountain pipeline has come on. We're now talking about another pipeline, which BC is upset about. BC basically says, you've got this pipeline coming across. If there's ever a leak, it goes into our salmon rivers. We've got tankers coming up and down. If there's ever an accident, it wipes out the indigenous fishing grounds. So, Alberta's saying, they're crying foul on, being landlocked. BC's crying foul for being, wanting to be environmental stewards. And then you've got the federal government trying to, mitigate the middle ground, and they're not pleasing anyone. It's like Trudeau #2 saying, okay, we're going to buy TMX for $34 billion, but then he puts an emissions cap on the industry. It's just like, what are you doing? Just, you should probably just get out of the way and allow, the industry to do what it does in a responsible manner. So, yeah, it's complicated. I think we have the opportunity to be fabulous. I think, you look at the UAE, Saudi Arabia, they're so rich because they don't stand in their own way. What other energy producer puts an emission cap on the one industry that represents 20% of your GDP?
Top export.
It doesn't make sense, but not to be political or anything like that. But you see things that sometimes don't make sense.
Talk to me about your company. So Prospera Energy, where do you guys fit in all this? What are you doing? Are you doing anything differently? What attracted you as you did your analysis on the company? You had plenty to choose from. Would love to understand that better.
Yeah. Prospera is a junior oil company, so with that comes inherent risks. But just as a history, basically these fields were initially developed in the 1980s by West Canada. In the 2000s, Nexen came in and did a lot of the drilling. So Nexen is a subsidiary of Occidental Petroleum. So they came in and they did single well vertical wells with very close spacing, and they got the properties that we are now working up to 10,000 barrels a day. Oil crashed, costs went up, so Nexen walked away. They sold it off to a junior company, and then the mid-cap company, and then the mid-cap essentially put it down to Geodoc Resources, which was Prospera's predecessor. Now, when I say we, the group that I'm involved with right now, we just did a final management switchover back in November of 24, reorganized the board, and as such, we are now starting anew. What's different about us is that we don't have to do any drilling. These wells have already been abandoned. They're already there. We already have the production profile of what they produce for, in some cases, 20 years. So we don't have the capital risk of doing a dry well. We don't have the expense of tubular. I mean, steel, the cost of steel is going crazy. But what we do have are wells that when we rework them, when we get the sand out of the well bores, when we get the water flood patterns under control, each well that we bring on does an average of 10 barrels a day. So when Nexen left, they had left an inventory of over 200 wells. So, you just do the math, and by the time you rework all of these, knowing what the project profile was previously, and with the step change that has happened in technology, we're able to work these wells at a much greater efficiency than they could back in the 2000s. There literally has been a step change in the technology, just like there was a step change in the technology to get the shale wells done. Mm-hmm. So, we have a bit of a competitive advantage there because the capital efficiencies of our wells are, it's about half that of the industry. And so what we are doing is reworking these to the point where if we get to 1,400 barrels, we're going to be essentially throwing $1 million of free cash flow at the corporate level. So it's very, very compelling, very exciting. And we have, insiders own 51% of the float. So it's very stable. We're all entrepreneurs. We've all been here for a very, long time. We know the business. We've got friendly debt. And it's a pretty exciting time. Everyone hates oil still, but I mean, we just have to get through this storm. Yeah, get through the storm.
How long does it take from the moment you take a well that's has it been left unused for 30 years, 20 years?
Yeah, sometimes it's a whole range. Some of them haven't been up and running for 20 years. I would say 20 is probably the longest. I may be wrong on that. We're never going to necessarily get them back up to where they were. Like, will this produce 10,000 barrels with the wells that we have? No, because we're not in primary production at this point. We have a 9% depletion status at this point. So there are 390 million barrels in place with on average 8 to 9% depletion. So that's the primary depletion. But there are secondary and tertiary ways to get the oil out of the ground. We use water flooding the area to bring the oil into the well bores. Mm-hmm. And we can also use polymer walls that actually push the oil towards the well bores as well, which is something that we're looking at doing very, very soon. So it takes your recovery factor from 8 or 9 up to the 20s and 30s and 40s. And there are analogies. Sorry, I can't get that out. Analogies are in fields right around us that are owned by Baytex and Strathcona and multiple other companies.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And so is the game plan, there's 200 wells, let's go after it, or are you acquiring more as you're going? And are there a lot of these wells that have been kind of abandoned through the 2020s?
Yeah, not so much through the 2020s. There are some wells that the production profile means that they're not going to be economic to bring on. Okay. So what we started off with at the beginning of the turnaround were low impact wells that we knew the profile would guarantee us lower rates of return, but we knew that it was there. And for the first 27 activations that we did back in Q1 of 24, we ended up doing that at a capital efficiency of about $9,400 or $7,400 per BOE, barrel of oil equivalent. So very economic. Then we did more throughout Q2 and Q3, a little bit higher in efficiency, but in the end, we got essentially our feel of what these oil wells would do. In the end, we have wells that didn't do 10 barrels a day. We had wells that back in the day were doing 100, 120, 150. And even if we get those back up to half their production, the investment is compelling. So what the interim CEO, Shabam Garg, and the ops team have done is prioritize all the wells according to production profile, what needs to be done to them, and then classifying them according to a capital efficiency. So because you're not drilling, you are essentially de-risking the harvest process. You are actually going in with a set number of budgets and prioritizing these so that you kind of maximize your return without blowing the bank wide open.
Very cool. Are you guys raising capital, or did you do this all with debt?
Well, the thing about the oil narrative and not having, basically that, we're not going to need the stuff is that capital has dried up to the industry. And when you're a junior player, it's a big deal not to have it. I always knew it was a capital intensive industry, but until you live it, you don't really realize just how much capital it takes to keep these things going. So, we have a senior debt holder who is super friendly, big time. He owns a lot of stock as well, as do our other debt holders. We have had to do a lot of this on debt. But again, we all have our eye on the prize. The prize is that we have to get up to 1,400 barrels, and then the ability to pay off that debt it's astronomical, and that's not where we're stopping either, not at 1,400. We have the opportunity to go, in my opinion, much higher. So yes, in that long-winded answer to your question, yes, we have had to use debt. Our stock has been too low to be able to raise money via that, but it has recovered as people see the story play out, and it's compelling.
You guys are on the TSX, I think is what you told me?
The Venture,
the Venture Exchange. Okay. Yeah. Very cool. I'll look you guys up. So are you guys raising any more capital, or is at this point, are you guys looking for additional investors, or you've got this all mapped out and now it's just execution and smiles on your face?
Yeah, no, I mean, we're always, right now we do have a convertible debenture that's open until December 14th. And that was quite a substantial raise. And we have had a lot of interest. We still do need to raise money moving forward. WTI is still at 60. So there is some subsidization that we need to do with that. But we've had so much interest. Like Shabam has had his LinkedIn profile working overtime. We have had so many inbounds, so many high net worth individuals that are interested in us that it's actually getting a little bit harder for Shabam and our CFO, Chris Lutke, to keep up with it. So we're really excited. But yeah, in long-winded answer to your question, we're always looking for equity partners and debt partners to move the story forward.
I'm not surprised. I mean, Shabam is a very impressive person when I met him. And I mean, he knows exactly what he's doing, and he's going full speed ahead, which is pretty cool.
Sometimes you meet somebody and you just realize they've got the whole package. They're inspirational. They've got the communication skills. They're smart as a whip and just seems to think on a different level. And, we as a board are lucky because usually when we think of something, he's already 2 steps ahead of us. So when you watch this type of talent moving forward and you see what he has done in the last year, my goodness, if we give this guy the capital that he needs, the sky's the limit because he's just a cut above the rest. So I'm inspired to be with him. I say that to my family all the time. They're like, yeah, you can see it in the way that he talks, how he holds himself. And when we met a few weeks ago, I'm sure you felt the same way.
Well, and I saw him in a breakfast setting, And then you told me to go take a look at his social media, and he's out in the field, like he's working like everybody else. It's incredible. He's not one of those CEOs that just sits in his office and gives out orders. I was very impressed.
Yeah, and that's the thing that we have that's a bit of a competitive advantage right now is that everybody in Calgary at head office has worked in the field. So our CEO, Darren, he's out in the field. He and Shabam are out there between the two of them probably about 80% of the time with the field operations. We've had to do a few changes in the field to make sure that we had the right people doing this. Mm-hmm. The changes have been phenomenal. We've just recently redone some infrastructure, and the infrastructure from Nexen is outstanding. Like I wasn't really sure when I went out last year, but then I saw the infrastructure. I was like, wow. Now that infrastructure actually is a liability to a company. You actually have to include it in your accounting as a liability because it requires upkeep. Well, we just redid 3 of our pipelines to change the water flood. And this is all on Shabam's back. I mean, just moving things forward pragmatically and systematically. So it's neat to watch.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Anything I didn't ask you about your company, about oil, that you think the listeners would get value from?
No, I just, it's a crazy world right now, right? We're just told so many things. And, I remember back in COVID saying, oh, thank goodness the economy is shut down. Like the air can breathe, like the earth, like I was one of those guys, but then when I started getting into the research and started realizing that the use of petroleum products, because it's so cost efficient, actually helps us achieve our green goals. And it's kind of the inverse of what we're told. We're saying we need to cut back on oil because we need to go green. Well, we need to use what we are producing with our backbone that we have in our economy through the use of oil to move ourselves forward. And I think we will. I think that the future is super bright. And, we as humans will figure something out. But, it's such an exciting time. But we can't cut off our nose to spite our face. We can't cut back the amount that we use thinking that we're saving the earth.
That's fair. Chris, if anybody wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to find you?
Well, you can email me, seymour@prosperaenergy.com, or you can give me a call or go to my website, or you can go to the Prospera website, and Shabam Garg and Chris Lutke's emails are available at that time.
Perfect.
At that spot.
Excellent. Well, Chris, thanks so much for taking the time. I learned a ton. I actually feel like I need to do some more research on the oil space. And you're an inspiration. We talk to a lot of Gen X men who have had long careers and are always thinking, oh, what if I had done this? Or I've got a passion somewhere else. I'd like to look into it. You have figured out a way to clone yourself and do 2 complete careers, which is very impressive, especially at your
impressive
age.
Or crazy, one of the two.
Yeah, I didn't want to say crazy, but it was very cool of you to do that and to share your story. And look forward to maybe having you on down the road to get an update on how things are going and keep tabs on the oil field.
Cheers. Anytime.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Chris.
Bye now.